You're listening to the Bigcast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Bigcast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology for credit unions and for anybody else who is interested in this kind of stuff. Speaking of which, I would say this is about the most real-time and intensely relevant episode we've done in some time. We are very happy to have had the opportunity to speak with Chuck Fagan, the CEO of PSCU Co-op, who shared a lot of thoughts, very candid thoughts around the progress they're making so far of combining those two long-standing organizations that have been very central to credit union card processing for some time, PSCU and Co-op. As you probably know, the combination of those two became official at the end of last year. So we'll be getting into that conversation with Chuck briefly. And as luck would have it, another combination of companies just popped up just over the course of the last day or so. In fact, I held off on recording these introductory comments so I could listen in to the investor call for the proposed acquisition by Capital One of Discover Financial Services, which is a big, big deal as well. And we'll be getting into that just briefly in just a second. Obviously, that is a developing story, but we got a little more information directly from the mouths of Capital One this morning. So I'd like to kind of bring that to your attention and then proceed with the credit union specific piece of it and our great conversation with Chuck Fagan. As always, you can find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com. And you can always find more from the Bigcast here with new content every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. So, as I mentioned, news broke on Monday night that Capital One was proposing, this is still, as always with acquisition subject to regulatory approval, a little bit of a longer slog. Capital One acquiring Discover. And the thing I jotted down as I thought about it is it's a bold move and potentially a brilliant move. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. I think the fascinating piece of it is that Discover is not just a card portfolio, but obviously one of the only truly built out credit card processing networks out there, that actually does pretty much what Visa and MasterCard does. So it's a little bit of a Rorschach test in terms of how you think about this transaction and frankly how the regulators think about this transaction. Is it a combination of a couple of large credit card lenders, or is it the opportunity to put additional scale and capabilities into a competing credit card and debit card processing network? That's the piece that'll kind of remain to be seen in terms of how it's viewed by folks. In terms of the investor call that took place this morning with the CEO, CFO of Capital One, as well as the CEO of Discover joining them as well, the focus was very heavily on the side of looking at the network and looking at the side of technology transformation. I don't want to say that the card portfolios were an afterthought, but the card portfolios were kind of an afterthought, at least in terms of the way they actually talked about things. Some of the analysis I saw, I would like to point out that Capital One, as far as credit card lenders and credit card activity, they're currently the number 4 card issuer. Discover is the number 6 card issuer. When you bring them together, they would vault all the way to number 1 in terms of outstanding credit card balances. If you look at actual transaction volume, they would jump up to number 3. Chase and American Express would still be higher in terms of the total amount of processing, which says to me that Capital One and Discover actually have more revolvers than transactors relative to those other two organizations. But again, the fascinating part of this transaction to me is the network, and that's both the debit and the credit card network. And the conversation this morning was pretty blunt about that. Capital One said they would pretty much immediately, upon closing of the acquisition, move all of their debit volume to Discover's Pulse network. They acknowledge that it's a little bit of a longer slog to get the credit card volume over, but they committed's not the word, I guess, set an expectation that they would be moving 25 million of their cardholders onto the Discover network by 2027. and about $175 billion of purchase volume. They also made it clear that they intend to preserve the Discover brand, both on the card side as well as in the network. They believe it does have very significant equity. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all comes together. And they didn't talk a whole lot because, again, with everything going on right now with the Credit Card Competition Act, the CCCA, if you think about it from that standpoint, this should, really tickle some of the, well, maybe not the regulators, because that's not, the CCCA was not necessarily being initiated by the CFPB. But the legislators, this is exactly what they were trying to do, is find another card network that could really get involved. And if you've got one of the biggest customers of Visa and MasterCard, which is what Capital One was, or is, and they make clear they're going to continue to work with them as well. But if they're moving all that volume over, it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. A couple of thoughts on that one, and I'm recording this just a little bit before the markets open on Tuesday. A couple of things. I noticed that both Visa and MasterCard stock was down in pre-market trading. Might be interesting to see how the market reacts to those two. Another very telling thing, because the regulatory approval piece is a real wild card here. And I think one way we can kind of see how confident the markets are that this is going to be approved will be that Capital One is paying a 26% premium over the stock market price of Discover as of closing of market last Friday. Let's see how much of that premium winds up getting priced into the stock immediately. If the market doesn't give all of, well, they probably won't give all of it, they never do, but if they don't give at least a pretty decent majority of it, that says that they've got some very serious concerns about this deal going through. It's one we're going to be watching closely, and we will be talking more about it, by the way. I would be virtually certain that this will be a primary topic, if not the main topic, at our next Credit Union Town Hall, which will take place on Wednesday, February 28th. That's at 3 p.m. on the East Coast and noon on the West Coast. As you know, a live and lively and interactive opportunity to share best practices and thoughts across the credit union community. Would love to have you join us. It's free to join, but advanced registration is required. We'll post a link to that in our show notes, but you can always find it also by going to cutownhall.com. And I hate to play up this side of things because hopefully you're joining for the content, but we have a tech giveaway too. So any credit union or financial institution employee and representative on the call will have a chance to win a neat little tech gadget. So join us for that. Now, with no further ado, let's jump in. Chuck Fagan, the CEO of PSCU Co-op, very busy man, obviously, right now, working through the integration process. We're less than 2 months into their opportunity to try to bring the two organizations together, and had a lot of great thoughts. Let's just go straight to Chuck and let him know how it's going.
Hey, Glenn, John, thank you for having me. It's obviously a busy time, and I know you guys are busy as always with all the great things you do for our industry.
So, obvious question just to get started off. I mean, I guess the combination closed at the end of the year. I know I was sitting, I believe, at Venture Tech, if I'm not mistaken, when the announcement was first made, kind of in early November. So it's been a pretty rapid process since then. How are things progressing? Is it, any surprises from what you expected at this stage of the game?
Yeah, I guess the key word would be rapid. A little backstory, if you're open to it.
Please.
This was the 5th time the two companies had engaged together, going all the way back to 2005 is the best of my recollection. And I was involved in 4 of them. And, those 3 letters, EGO, got in the way. So egos pop up, as you would expect. But I think the thing that was different this time was we all collectively agreed to focus on our employees, our member owner credit unions, and our industry. And if we stay focused there, it makes all the sense in the world to go do this. And, we get to do it right. We started, as you mentioned, early November. November 7th was an announcement. And because of the size of the combination, we had to go to DOJ, and that process was quite an interesting process. And on December 27th, we got their approval, which is kind of a weird approval. It just says we've concluded our investigation or evaluation. And it doesn't say, hey, you're good to go. But I asked our attorney what that meant, and he said it means you're good to go. So we closed on January 1st, and I had at least in my mind what the executive team would look like. So we made that announcement, and we've hired a consultant to stand in the middle of the integration to make sure the two companies come together the right way, a consultant who has a ton of experience around these types of things. But we want the bulk of our employees to stay focused on our credit union's existing business. I can't go to a credit union and say, hey, this wonderful project you're working with Big on is, I know important, but we got to bring these two companies together. That doesn't work. You can't interrupt a credit union's business for the sake of pulling the two organizations together. So we've really dedicated that team to integration and kind of focused the rest of our employees on our ongoing business.
I think that's. I'm sorry, Glenn. I think that's so smart. It's been a year of these types of things. Like, how often have people talked about CUNA and NAFCU, right? And the fact that they're pulling together. And I think bringing in consultants, the fact that I am one notwithstanding, is always helpful. And it's weird how that works. It's always like, I like to check it out. Chuck, we had a conversation when my son was wrestling and we were talking about it. And I said, I could go out there and go, don't do this and that. And, he'd look at me and go, whatever. I'd go back and do exactly the two things I told him not to. But then if my buddy, whose kid is also wrestling, tell my son the same thing, it's gospel. And so it's weird how that works. But I think the point of it is that your two organizations are going to go through a journey here together. And it's important that everybody gets the same thing out of that journey, and that there aren't two separate journeys or the paths don't diverge. And I think that bringing in third parties really helps for that.
Yeah, and John, I think the other thing that lines up with what you're saying is the most frequent comment I got was, what took you so long?
Yeah.
We had 6 players, you'll remember 4 or 5 years ago with First Data Fiserv. You had Vantiv and FIS, and you had Global Payments and TSYS, and they consolidated down to 3. And a large part of that was scale. And in our case, you look at 8 billion transactions, PSCU, 8 billion transactions, Co-op Solutions, and you pull that together, there's obviously some pretty strong volume from an issuer perspective there. But the other thing I always point out, and this gets, into your world, is when you're looking at PCI compliance, you're looking at cyber and the spend you have to do on an annual basis, the things you have to do around IT licenses and all of that stuff to keep your technology moving forward. We were double spending on those areas. And for us to be able to take, 10 to 12 million that each company was spending on those areas and do it once means we get to focus on innovation, some of the newer mobile and digital technologies that are coming down the path. So just, you can talk about, our participation at GAC or 2 client conferences. Yeah, you're gonna get an opportunity to evaluate, do you spend twice on some of that stuff? But when you get to the nuts and bolts of the capital spend of the organization on some of those technology efforts, that's a big deal when you're spending credit union member money.
Well, PSC was founded on that thought process of collaboration. I happened to work at both your founding credit unions at one point or another, and also with the actual founders, Dawson and Hobart. It got to know them, and that was their purpose to begin with. And we've seen that throughout the country is that consolidation, and seems to help. I couldn't agree more that, it's like I keep saying, when you look at like an average credit union that has maybe, 500, 1,500 Office 365 accounts. Like my father-in-law worked for the Cherokee Nation, and they had, I think, 15,000 accounts, across the medical and everything else. And you know how many people they had to run the Office 365? Him and another guy. So the point is that there's a lot of that overlap, I think, and you're making, you're making good sense around that.
In that direction, I'm kind of curious because one of the things I noticed on the FAQ, and as you say, Chuck, you don't want everybody, the credit unions can't just, halt other things to make some of this conversion and integration happen. I saw a reference that there won't be any forced migrations for at least 5 years. So in terms of kind of pulling together those synergies, how does that, what does that roadmap look like?
Yeah, it's interesting, Glenn. We've got a board member who's put a thought in my mind that, credit union CEOs put their job at risk for 3 reasons. Number one, something that damages the brand of the credit union. Number two, build too nice of a headquarters building. And number 3, a bad conversion.
Yep.
So, me, probably in the same range as John, being in this industry since 1988, and having gone through core conversions and obviously seen a multitude of conversions with our business over the years, we have a partnership that's strong, that's been in place since 1989 with First Data, now Fiserv, and Co-op's had a long, rich history with FIS. And, the utilization of those platforms, again, kind of same premise. We can't disrupt a credit union's business because these two organizations are coming together. And when I say disrupt, force them into a conversion soon. And then the second part to it is both organizations have existing contracts. And, you work with these large public companies, and they're certainly, and rightfully so, going to be very protective of their agreements. So I think the combination of those two things is one of the reasons behind that at least 5-year period, no forced migrations. But what will happen, and I think this is where we get an opportunity to scale it a bit, is an example Springboard, which is kind of the Co-op member owners' entry into FIS and Fiserv, and then on PSCU side, Quick Assist. Both tools do many of the same things. We have our product group with that consultant sitting in the middle, rationalizing the technology on both. And, we get to come out of this with the best of what both organizations had to offer. And there will be instances, just because it's going to take a while to bring the two organizations together, it's probably more of a 2025 thing than 24, but there will be shifts like that, to where we have to say to a credit union, look, this is the new tool and it is capturing the best of both worlds. And you're going to have to, learn a little bit different way of going about it. But again, that's going to take some time. So it won't be 100% free, but at least at that platform level, I think we can protect that.
What I think I'm hearing is, I think it's appropriately setting expectations. The true synergies, the long-term synergies are going to take, like you say, they'll play out over those 5 years as contracts expire, as things can get set on credit union roadmaps. But at some point, you got to start the clock running. No matter when you did this, it was going to take some time to get everything kind of integrated.
Well, and I was going to kind of speak to that, Chuck. One thing I know about you is that you're all about relationships, and the fact that you've taken these into account is important. But I would imagine that there is a great group of supporters of PSCU, and I would imagine some of those guys are going to elect to start moving, to help you sort of set the stage for that early. If I had to guess.
Well, I would think you're right, John. I think we have two pretty unique characteristics of both companies. One, at Co-op, they use what they call co-creation councils, in PSCU's case, advisory groups. And it's from that notion, if you build it, they might come. If you build it with them, they're already there. And getting that feedback from, some of the credit unions you're obviously close to, we do it in a way that they're informed, they're influencing, and we've got to obviously put our payments and technology expertise in it as well. But I think we come out on the better side with people either willing to move and adjust, Or John, to your point, they're ready to go, and whether it's beta, whether it's pilot, whatever that utilization may be, you've got a captive audience to take it on, and that's an asset that I think is very important, and that's that trust factor.
Yeah,
The other thing I
it's
saw that
very
I think is important from the uniqueness of co-op, the shared branching and the shared ATM, and I see you've also gone on record that those two initiatives continued forward as well.
Yeah, what great assets. There are obviously some likeness. We do credit and debit card processing. Co-op did credit and debit card processing. They have a contact center in Dallas, which is a great facility. I never thought I'd walk into a co-op facility and have my name on the door, but that did happen. I even got a security badge, so that was pretty cool. And then, PSCU has Juniper Payments, which, we've really gotten staged for FedNow and the faster and real-time payments movement. We have Lumen Digital, which we've built and grown up, and getting the full API set for payments from Co-op on their processing side is going to open up a whole new potential client base for Lumen Digital. And then, we have a collections operation. So there are very complementary things within the organizations. And one of the things that will be no surprise to you guys, because you're around it all the time, but most pricing elements and payments are in a bit of a race to zero. And diversifying your revenue set and being a bit broader in the channels that you can support credit union members is a way to offset a bit of that race to zero. And I think the complementary assets, you mentioned shared branching and the ATM network, those are two things PSCU never had. And they are assets that credit unions depend on. And I think one of the things both organizations did quite well over 40 years was they made credit unions bigger than they were. And, John referenced the early founders. I mean, that was kind of the premise. It was pure scale in the beginning, but now both organizations own a lot of technology, and utilizing that in a way that the member still doesn't know PSCU Co-op Solutions exists, but we expand a credit union's ability to interact and engage in that deep relationship with the member. And I think one of those newest areas that, I don't know that anybody has solved yet, but we're going to continue trying, is on the data front. The data both organizations is representing, I think, can really enable some personalization down at that member level.
Interesting.
It's funny because I was just talking about that with Lamont Black on the webinar yesterday. Personalization and transparency with this, especially with finances, I think is the future. And one of the things that it's funny because here's my business idea for you, Chuck. You can take it or leave it. Personalization comes down to preferences, right? But yet no credit union that I know of has a good place to store people's preferences. So you need to change PSCU from payments services for credit unions and call it preferences services for credit unions. And there needs to be a place that stores all of these preferences. Otherwise, we'll never personalize in the way that people want, because we're always sort of trying to figure it out from their data and whatnot, which is, sometimes good. But what's wrong with just saying, what are your preferences? And let's get that stored. So anyways, just a crazy idea. Sorry.
No, I don't think that's crazy at all. And when you go back to 2020, March 15th, roughly, when we entered COVID, the fintechs and the larger technology companies that came out of that really excelling, not like, oh, we're entering into a pandemic, we need to pull back. But the ones that really accelerated through and out of, they enabled that preference side of things for the consumer, and they set them up. And I think your point's valid. The financial services industry has opportunity in that space.
When we talk about synergies, I'm curious, maybe this is just kind of a misperception on my part, but it seemed the Co-op's client member base was more West Coast centric, PSCU. I mean, in part just because of where the headquarters were, kind of started from the East. Is there a geographic synergy that you kind of saw as part of the equation as well?
Glenn, that is spot on. I think Co-op Solutions did a fabulous job of locking down much of the West Coast. We penetrated here and there. And I think PSCU did a great job of really locking down the East Coast, middle of the country, a bit up for grabs. But to be able to combine and be that, almost system partner, if you will, because of the strengths on both sides of the country. Now we both and PSCU had a strong presence in Hawaii. I think Co-op has some business in those areas, Alaska, Hawaii, and when you get to the central part of the country, it was kind of that up for grabs. But I think that synergy side, at least on the revenue piece, is huge. The synergy side on looking at the two organizations, there's clearly opportunity there, but we're not answering to Wall Street. We get to March 31st. I don't have to say to Wall Street, okay, this is what we've accomplished to date on the synergy side of things. We get to do it in a way that really makes a lot of sense, that doesn't disrupt credit union business to any degree. And if it takes 18 months, 2 years, even a little bit beyond, I've kind of told our board 2 years to get really the culture right, to get the two organizations fully integrated, to get through a lot of that product rationalization side. Then, there are absolutely some synergies because of the crossover between the two companies. But, both companies agreed, this is kind of late summer last year, we got a ton of new positions that both companies are recruiting for. Let's put a pause on those new positions, because as we go through and we have duplication in the company, we can tell individuals, hey, we got these open positions that we were going to be recruiting for, and try and slot as many of those people into those positions. I mean, that's different. Not a lot of companies have the flexibility and the time to enable that type of transition for people. So we're trying to look at it differently, and I think you nailed it on the revenue side. On the expense side, there's kind of this integration management office that will drive a lot of that.
That's a really great point. I really hadn't thought about it quite that way. That the credit union difference. Once again, you don't have to answer to the public markets where there's a scorecard saying you said you're going to get X amount of efficiencies. Where is it? You're answering to a board that actually understands what the implications of those reductions are. So they're going to be much more realistic about doing that prudently. So
yeah, I think one of the coolest things that I was told would happen, I don't know that I necessarily believed it, but you work with valuation consultants and different people who have way more experience dealing with transactions of this size. And what one of the consultants told us is, you will see the board coalesce and get to be one team first. Then it's going to be other areas of the company that kind of follow suit. So we had our first board meeting with the directors from Co-op and PSCU together late in the first week of January out in Phoenix. And I got to tell you, by mid the first day, the two boards, you wouldn't have been able, as an outsider coming in, to say, oh, that person's from one of the organizations and the person next to him's from the other. It happened, and it didn't feel like the first meeting between the two groups. And to a degree, we're seeing that happen in management now as well, which is exciting. The sales and account management team is what they told us would coalesce next. And that experience those guys has was pretty spot on, because you got to protect your market. You've got to enable the credit unions to continue business as usual. They have strategic plans coming into the year, and the sales and account management people are the ones that are going to kind of quarterback that for them. So it's been spot on. And I was very pleased to see the board interact and collaborate the way they did.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard it kind of stated that way before, but it makes good sense, and glad to hear it's working out that way. We talked before we started recording a bit. I think it's interesting that you've got two client conferences coming up, I believe in April and May, which when I first saw them announced, it kind of threw me for a loop. But then as we talked about, these things take a long time to plan. So, it was a little difficult to change course, given how late in the year, the combination came together. what's the synergy there? I assume there's going to be a commonality of message to some extent. It's your first chance to really get face to face with a lot of these clients.
Yeah, and there was we were too late in the process to change course this year. And the way the two conferences, PSU's member forum is going to be in San Antonio at the JW Marriott, and the co-op conference is in Nashville, and they're going to be different. Think is, got a great flow to it. They've built that to where it's very highly interactive, and the PSU member forum is just a first-class event. So I expect many credit unions to attend both. I know there's some credit unions that, if they traditionally would have sent 4 to PSU's member forum, they're sending 2 to member forum. They're sending 2 to Think. So I think that's a great way to go about it. But you hit on something that is a reality of the size of both organizations, not only independent, but now as a combination. PSU had signed contracts for member forum out through 2027 or 28. So when you get to the size of bringing in 1,300 to 1,500 people, there are but so many conference centers at hotels that can host that. Most Vegas hotels can, but do you want to go to Vegas every single year? So we try and East Coast, West Coast it a bit. So we have a team, the events team from both organizations that are taking a look at how we can, take those contracts, not have significant penalties attached to them, and potentially look at a single conference in years to come. But both organizations also had their annual meeting, their annual business meeting, which is required by bylaws at those 2 meetings. So we've taken PSU's fiscal year as the new organization's fiscal year, which starts October 1, obviously goes through September 30th. The reason we've always done it that way is the biggest holiday or the biggest season for payments is obviously the holiday season. And if you have a robust holiday season, it allows you to make different decisions throughout the rest of the year than you would if it was a pretty sluggish holiday season. And we like having that on the first quarter as opposed to the last. So co-op will have a stub year on the financials for 2024, with the closing happened on January 1st, and we'll go to our model. And that means, back to the member forum side, we've got to, according to the bylaws, have that meeting by mid-April on an annual basis. So I would think that's going to be the timing. But again, I have a team with a work stream to kind of get a view of what that looks like in the future.
So it sounds like it's not necessarily a slam dunk that it's a single conference in 2025. And given the fact that you'll still be operating multiple platforms, and some of this is the clients that, getting that level of information, that doesn't strike me as a major issue either.
Yeah, I agree. And more details to come. It's the same, around branding. Both companies have huge 40+ year histories with the names. And, John and I go back to the days of payment systems for credit unions.
Yep.
We have a whole work stream looking at what branding should be. Right now it's PSU Co-op Solutions. Should it be that long a name? Should it be, one company or the other? We've gotten to a stage now where, you could look at like Coca-Cola, and you've got Dasani, you've got Diet Coke, you've got regular Coke underneath the main brand. And in our case, we have Juniper Payments, we have Primax, we have Lumen Digital, Co-op Shared Branching. So you've got a bunch of flexibility in how you do the brand. And as you both know, branding is one of those areas where you can spend a lot of money really quick. So, our team said, hey, should we rush on branding to try and get something in place by GAC? And I'm like, no, it's just too important of a decision, too costly to go down that path. Do it right, and we'll announce and do whatever the forward direction is at the right time.
Speaking of GAC, that's the first opportunity, even before your 2 client conferences, and same kind of premise applies. I mean, you actually still have both companies with kind of separate presence on the trade show floor, again, because that was well, past the fail-safe point, that you could change that. But that's your first opportunity, I guess, and you'll be there as well, right? So people can get a first sense of the combined organization.
Yeah, and that'll obviously be the first of America's Credit Union, and first for PSCU Co-op. And you're right, we will have 2 spaces. Both booths will be there. We're going to try and make them different. Each are positioned on the hall there, where one is kind of at the entrance, one is kind of as you're heading into the speaking room. And I think Lumen Digital actually has their small space as well. So we'll be well represented. I think it's going to be exciting to have both of us there. As I think you both know, we both have kind of a social event on Tuesday evening. And, in PSU's case, we have an event at the Smithsonian Art Museum, and we usually bring in an insider Washington, D.C. speaker. And then Co-op has right down the street always had kind of a concert, and we moved the timing of our event up, and we pushed the Co-op event just back slightly so that credit union people can do both. So we're really, you're right, there's a duplication, but we're trying to make them as different as possible so that people can take advantage of all that we have to offer.
So Chuck, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, and this is something that I know you're going to have to navigate. And I'll give you a hint: you should hire some company that's really good at this particular thing. But I'm not saying who or anything. But how do you, as you navigate this, when a credit union does a merger, or not a merger, but a conversion, they tend to lose about a year of progress. And in an environment today where we have AI moving at unbelievable speeds, how do you how do you while this is all going on, how do you keep that moving forward? And I was kidding about big, but how are you going to keep that, how are you not going to lose ground while you're sort of connecting these 2 organizations together? And I know this. I was just curious.
Yeah, and John, I have been doing obviously quite a number of interviews, and one of the interviews said, what keeps you up at night? And right up there at the top is the cadence and speed of our company. We can't lose sight of what you're saying, how fast AI and other technology is moving. And we've been using AI, so as Co-op Solutions, for a number of years, specifically in the fraud area, the machine learning, and really, you got to do it because the fraudsters are using AI to try and do the reverse, to crack in and gain access to cardholder accounts and identities. So there's some experience that exists, but we've carved out, we'll call it an emerging services unit. And that emerging services unit has people that are with deep expertise around blockchain, with deep expertise around crypto, with AI. So there are roles that exist today that didn't exist 2, 3, 5 years ago. And I expect that to continue. The 2 areas that I've struggled to say no to on a budget request, number one is anything related to cyber. I'm just not brave enough to do it. And then number 2 is AI and that whole emerging services area. You can't take the integration of the 2 companies as a 2-year pause. It's not only does your ongoing business have to continue at a pretty fast clip, but you might even have to increase it because that's the way the outside world is working.
Yeah, there was a great article just came out yesterday. Microsoft and OpenAI came together and said that the hackers are using ChatGPT and other things to improve their cyber attacks. And yeah, that bar has just gone way up. I definitely agree. But also, AI is another one of those opportunities for someone like you, particularly at your scale, because it needs scale, to create, for a PSU to really foster the collaboration that could actually put credit union industry over the top, which would be very exciting, with regard to that, because you think of the preferences and the personalization aspect. That's what AI is going to bring to it. But I don't want to derail us too much for that. I was just curious. I knew it was something that probably kept you up at night, but I also knew you well enough to know you had a plan because, That's exactly, when you first called me, when I first started Big, and you said, hey, I want you to come down here to Q's and help me out. You were trying to pull that whole organization together, but you were always thinking, forward. So I've always appreciated that about you. Not to kiss your butt too much on the call, but that's the truth.
And you delivered. So I appreciate what you brought to the table there.
Well, thank you.
Well, Chuck, you've been very generous with your time, and this has just been a fascinating conversation and very candid too. And I really appreciate that. So we'll provide the links both to the Co-op Think event as well as the PSCU member forum, as well as obviously make sure people are aware that they can track you down at GAC in a few weeks. Any other parting thoughts from either of you that but I think that we've got a pretty good idea of the path forward.
I would these types of discussions, they're so valuable. I listen to as many of yours that you do, and obviously others, but thank you for having me on. Thank you for thinking of PSCU Co-op. You both have obviously been around the industry for a long time, and really do appreciate you thinking of us. And as we get to GAC and get an opportunity to see each other in person, always want to hear that, hey, I heard, PSCU had a success story here, or I heard that PSCU Co-op had a little bit of a drop into the ball here. I want to hear that. That's how we get better. So thanks again for all you guys do, and look forward to seeing you soon.
So I was really, really pleasantly surprised at just how candid Chuck was in the conversation. And it's interesting that I didn't even think about the Department of Justice in terms of antitrust and competitive issues around, co-op and PSCU. Obviously, that was something that they did have to think about, and as you mentioned, wound up not being a big deal. I'll point out again, we recorded that interview last week before the Capital One Discover announcement was public. So he had no idea on that. I was also surprised to hear him actually talk openly about the fact that this was not the first time there were, some fairly reasonably serious discussions about combining these two organizations. So good to see that something that does seem to be awfully logical on the surface is finally moving forward. And as he mentioned, both organizations, the combined organization and also under their individual respective flags, will be present at the Government Affairs Conference in Washington, D.C. from America's Credit Unions. That starts up on Sunday, March 3rd, and runs through, I guess the Hike the Hill Day is on Thursday the 7th. The stuff at the Convention Center, I think, wraps up about noontime on Wednesday. John Best and I will both be out there. We're co-leading a panel, a CEO members roundtable. I believe that's on Tuesday. I'll also be moderating a panel around open banking. And there's always just all kinds of great stuff going on. And we'll be gathering interviews there and sharing them here on the Bigcast a little bit later in the month of March. So if you're going out that way, please drop us a note. We'd love to track you down there. With that, this has been a longer than usual episode, and hopefully for very good reasons, you'd agree, in terms of all the content between PSCU Co-op as well as the breaking news around the rest of the card space. You can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking us out at big-fintech.com. Check the media tab and you'll find an archive of old podcast episodes, including lots of great conversations with lots of thought leaders in the fintech space, including last week's interview with Barlow Research, which I thought had some great insights about the world of small business and their attitude toward financial relationships with their financial institutions. Hope to see you soon. We will be back again next week with new content. Wouldn't surprise me if we're talking more about the mergers in the air. And until then, thanks as always for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Bigcast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big Fintech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.